Before the Grammys, before the United Nations, before selling out stadiums in minutes, BTS were just regular kids sitting in classrooms, getting scolded by teachers and daydreaming about a future nobody believed in. But here's what's crazy. Their teachers remember everything. Which member was so silent that teachers thought something was wrong with him? Which one was begged by his teacher to quit his idle dream because his grades were too good to waste? And which member was such a troublemaker that nobody saw his success coming? From number 7 to number 1, each reveal hits harder than the last. This is the story their teachers told. Let's get into it.
Number 7, Jin. All right, kicking things off at number 7, and honestly, this one sets the tone for just how wild these backstories really are. Because when we talk about Kim Sok-jin, the worldwide handsome, the guy who literally stops traffic with his face and casually drops dad jokes in front of millions of fans like he's hosting a weekend barbecue, you'd think this dude was always the center of attention. You'd think he walked into every room and owned it since kindergarten, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. And that's exactly why Jin's story kicks off this list, because the gap between who he was in school and who he became on stage is genuinely one of the most underrated origin stories in the entire K-pop industry. Let's rewind. Kim Sok-jin was born on December 4th, 1992 in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, a quiet, well-off suburban city just south of Seoul. Now, Gwacheon isn't exactly the kind of place that produces global superstars. It's known for Seoul Grand Park, the National Museum of Contemporary Art, and being the kind of neighborhood where families go for peaceful weekend walks. It's calm, it's orderly, and honestly, that energy perfectly matched young Sok-jin's personality. According to multiple accounts from people who knew him during his school years, Jin was the kind of student that every teacher loved but almost never noticed. And yes, those two things can coexist. He was polite, he was quiet, he turned in his homework on time, he didn't cause trouble, he didn't crack jokes in class, he didn't fight with other students. He was just there. A handsome, well-mannered kid sitting somewhere in the middle row, blending into the background like he was actively trying to be invisible. And that's the part that blows people's minds, because this is the same guy who years later would blow flying kisses to 90,000 people in a stadium and scream, "I'm worldwide handsome," without a single ounce of hesitation. But back then, his teachers described him as one of the quietest students in the class, not shy in a painful, anxious way, just genuinely reserved. He didn't seek validation, he didn't need to be the loudest voice. He was comfortable in his own silence, and honestly, that's a rare quality in a teenager. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Jin didn't grow up dreaming about music, not even close. His actual dream? Acting. He was deeply inspired by Korean actor Kim Nam-gil, the star of historical dramas like Queen Sondek. Jin saw that man on screen and something clicked. He wanted to tell stories. He wanted to be on camera. He wanted to move people through performance. So he made a practical decision. He enrolled at Jungkook University in Seoul, majoring in film and visual arts, a solid, respected program. His family supported it. His teachers probably thought, yeah, that makes sense. Good-looking kid, quiet demeanor, he'll do well in the arts. Everything was on a clean, predictable track. And then the universe threw a curveball that nobody saw coming. One day, while Jin was just walking near the Konkuk University campus, minding his own business, a casting agent from Big Hit Entertainment spotted him. Now, let's be real. Big Hit in those days was not the powerhouse empire it is today. This was a tiny, struggling company run by Bang Si-hyuk with barely enough budget to keep the lights on. But that agent saw something in Jin's face, something magnetic, something that the camera would love, and they approached him on the spot. Now, here's the wildest part of this whole story. Jin genuinely thought it was a scam, and can you blame him? A random stranger walks up to you on the street and says, "Hey, you're really good looking. Want to be a pop star?" In what universe does that not sound like a scam? But Jin, quiet, careful, analytical Jin, decided to look into it anyway, and eventually, after doing his research, he auditioned. And he got in.
But here's what makes this story absolutely insane from a teacher's perspective. Kim Sok-jin had zero training. Let that sink in. Zero vocal training, zero dance training, zero experience performing on any stage. The other trainees at Big Head had been grinding for years. They'd been singing since childhood, dancing since they could walk, sacrificing their entire adolescence for this dream. And then in walks this film major with a pretty face who had never held a microphone in a professional setting in his entire life. His teachers back in Gwacheon, they had no idea any of this was happening. To them, Sok-jin was the quiet kid who graduated without making waves and went off to study film like he'd planned. There was no dramatic moment where a teacher pulled him aside and said, "You're going to be a star." There was no tearful goodbye at the school gates. He just left, quietly, the same way he did everything.
Number 6. J-Hope. Coming in at number 6, and if you thought Jin's story was a plot twist, buckle up, because Jung Ho-sak's backstory reads like a movie script that Hollywood would reject for being too dramatic to be real. We're talking about J-Hope, the BTS main dancer, the human embodiment of sunshine, the guy whose energy on stage is so electric that you'd swear he was plugged into a power grid. But before the world knew him as J-Hope, before he became the man who could command an entire stadium with a single body roll, he was just a kid from Gwangju. And in that city, in those dance studios, in those underground battle circles, his teachers watched something extraordinary unfold in real time. And what they saw? It was equal parts inspiring and, honestly, a little frightening. Let's take it back. Jung Ho-sak was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Korea, a city in the southwestern part of the country that most international fans probably couldn't point to on a map. Gwangju isn't Seoul, it's not Busan, it doesn't have the glamour or the entertainment industry infrastructure. But what Gwangju does have, and this is crucial to understanding Ho-sak's origin, is one of the most passionate underground street dance cultures in all of South Korea. And we're not talking about casual hobby dancing. We're talking about popping, locking, crumping, freestyle battles, dance crews with reputations, local competitions that felt like war zones, and a community of dancers who took their craft as seriously as any professional athlete. This was the world that young Ho-sak walked into. And he didn't just walk in, he absolutely demolished it. According to people who knew him during those years, Ho-sak started dancing when he was just a kid, and from the very beginning, it was obvious that something was different about him. This wasn't a boy who learned choreography step by step like everyone else. This was a boy who felt music in his bones, who could watch a routine once and replicate it with his own flavor added on top, who moved with a fluidity and a precision that kids his age simply could not match. His dance instructors in Gwangju noticed it immediately. There's a difference between a student who works hard and a student who is genuinely gifted, and Ho-sak was both. That combination is rare. That combination is dangerous. Because when natural talent meets relentless work ethic, you don't just get a good dancer, you get a force of nature. By the time he was in middle school, Ho-sak had already joined a street dance crew. And not just any crew, he was part of a team that competed at a serious level. The crew's name? Neuron. And in Gwangju's underground dance scene, Neuron wasn't just known, they were respected. They battled other crews, entered competitions across the region, and built a reputation that made people take notice. And at the center of it all was this skinny, bright-eyed kid named Jung Ho-sak, who danced like he had decades of experience packed into a teenage body. In 2008, Ho-sak entered a national dance competition and he won. Not second place, not honorable mention, he won. At that point, his teachers and instructors in Gwangju were having a very specific conversation among themselves. This kid could go all the way. But all the way in the dance world and all the way in the K-pop world are two very different paths. And that's where the story gets complicated. See, Hoseok's dance teachers saw him as a pure dancer, a street dance artist, a performer who belonged on the battle stage, a kid who could potentially represent South Korea in international dance competitions and carry the flag of Gwangju's dance culture to the world. That was the path they envisioned for him. That was the future they were nurturing. And then one day, Hoseok told them he wanted to audition for an entertainment company. He wanted to become an idol. And for his dance teachers, that moment was gut-wrenching, because in the street dance community, there's a very specific tension between underground dance culture and the idol industry. Underground dancers pride themselves on authenticity, on raw expression, on battles and ciphers and freestyle. It's art in its purest form. The idol industry, on the other hand, is synchronized choreography, manufactured concepts, and entertainment packaging. To some of Hoseok's dance mentors, watching their most talented student leave for the idol world felt like watching a prodigy violinist abandon classical music to join a boy band. It wasn't that they didn't support him, it's that they genuinely believed his talent was bigger than the idol format could contain. But Hoseok had made his mind. He auditioned. First, he actually went for JYP Entertainment, one of the big three. And according to various accounts, he made it far into the audition process. But ultimately, things didn't work out at JYP.
Number 5. Jungkook. Number 5. And right here is where this list takes a sharp emotional turn. Because we're not just talking about a student who surprised his teachers or a kid who had a hidden talent. No, we're talking about a child, and yes, he was still a child, who looked his teachers in the eye, packed a bag that was probably bigger than his confidence at the time, and walked away from everything he had ever known. We're talking about Jungkook, the golden maknae, the guy who can sing, dance, rap, produce, compose, film, edit, do archery, paint, play sports at a near-professional level, basically the human equivalent of a cheat code. Today, Jungkook is arguably the most famous Korean artist on the planet. His solo tracks shatter records like glass. His face is recognized on every continent. FIFA World Cup stages, billions of streams, global brand deals. The man is operating on a level that most artists can't even conceptualize. But rewind to 2011 in a middle school classroom in Busan, and you'd see a completely different person. You'd see a boy so painfully shy that his teachers sometimes wondered if he was okay. Let's go back to the very beginning. Jungkook was born on September 1st, 1997, in Mandaeok-dong, a neighborhood in Busan, South Korea's second-largest city, a sprawling port town on the southeastern coast, known for its beaches, its seafood markets, its thick Saturi dialect, and its fiercely proud local identity. Busan kids are different from Seoul kids. They're louder, tougher, more direct. It's a cultural thing. But Jungkook, he was the exception. According to people who knew him during his school years, young Jungkook was the quiet kid. Not quiet in a mysterious, cool way, quiet in a genuinely introverted, almost fragile way. He didn't raise his hand in class. He didn't volunteer for presentations. He sat near the back, kept his head down, and mostly stayed in his own world. His teachers noticed this, of course. In Korean schools, teachers pay close attention to students' social behavior, and a kid who barely speaks is always on the radar. But Jungkook wasn't being bullied. He wasn't struggling academically. He wasn't unhappy, at least not visibly. He was just internal. A kid who processed the world through watching and absorbing rather than participating and shouting. But here's the thing his teachers did notice. When it came to anything physical or creative, Jungkook transformed. Sports day, suddenly this quiet boy was outrunning everyone in his grade. Art class, his drawings were detailed and expressive in ways that surprised even the art teacher. Music class, his voice, even untrained, even raw, had a quality that made people stop and listen. There was something there. Multiple somethings, actually. But nobody, not his teachers, not his classmates, not even Jungkook himself, understood the full scope of what was hiding inside this shy kid from Mandaeok-dong. Not yet. Then came 2011 and everything changed. At just 13 years old, Jungkook made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his entire life. He auditioned for Superstar K3, one of South Korea's biggest televised singing competitions, basically the Korean equivalent of American Idol. Now, let's put this in perspective. A 13-year-old kid who could barely make eye contact with his own teachers walked into a national television audition and performed. Think about the courage that took. Think about the internal battle between his shyness and his dream. Think about what it means for a boy who never raised his hand in class to suddenly raise a microphone in front of judges and cameras. He didn't win. He didn't even make it past the early rounds. But what happened next is one of those moments that proves the universe has a sense of timing. After his audition aired, Jungkook received casting offers from 7 different entertainment agencies. 7. Let that number sink in. This kid who couldn't speak up in class had 7 companies fighting over him before he'd even finished middle school. He could have gone to JYP Entertainment. He could have gone to FNC or any number of established agencies. But Jungkook, shy, quiet, barely teenage Jungkook, made a choice that would change music history. He chose Big Hit Entertainment. Why? Because during his visit to Big Hit, he saw a trainee named Kim Namjoon, the future RM, rehearsing, and something about Namjoon's presence, his charisma, his raw intensity, made Jungkook think, I want to be where that guy is. A 13-year-old chose his entire future based on a gut feeling about another trainee. If that's not destiny, nothing is. But here's where the story gets heavy, really heavy. To join Big Hit, Jungkook had to leave Busan. He had to leave his family. He had to leave his school. He had to leave his friends, the few close ones he had. He had to move to Seoul, a massive, overwhelming city where he knew absolutely nobody except the trainees at Big Hit. He was 15.
Number 4. RM. Number 4. And listen, if there's one story on this entire list that perfectly captures the tension between what society expects from you and what your soul is screaming at you to do, it's this one. Because we're talking about Kim Namjoon, RM, the leader of BTS, the man who delivered a speech at the United Nations that made world leaders sit up straight. The man who walks through art museums like a scholar, quotes philosophers in casual conversation, and writes lyrics so layered that university professors have literally used them as teaching material. Today, Kim Namjoon is widely regarded as one of the most intelligent and articulate figures in the global entertainment industry. But before any of that, before the dimple, before the iconic Love Yourself speech, before he became the voice of a generation, he was a student in Ilsan. And his teachers, they didn't just notice his brilliance, they were consumed by it. And when he told them what he actually wanted to do with his life, they didn't cheer, they didn't encourage him, they practically begged him to change his mind. Let's set the stage. Kim Namjoon was born on September 12, 1994 in Ilsan, a planned suburban city in the Goyang district of Gyeonggi Province, just northwest of Seoul. Ilsan is one of those meticulously organized satellite cities that Korea built in the 1990s. Clean streets, modern apartment complexes, good schools. A community designed for families who wanted Seoul access without Seoul chaos. It's the kind of place where parents expect their kids to study hard, test well, get into a top university, land a stable career, and live a comfortable, respectable life. And young Namjoon, he was doing exactly that. Better than exactly that, actually. He was demolishing it. Namjoon's IQ has been reported at 148. Let's just sit with that number for a second. 148. The average IQ is 100. A score of 130 puts you in the top 2% of the population. A score of 148 puts you in a stratosphere where the air is thin and the company is very, very small.
We're talking about a mind that processes information at a speed and depth that most people simply cannot access. And this wasn't just a number on a test. Namjoon's intelligence showed up in everything he did. In school, his academic performance was staggering. He consistently ranked in the top 1% on national standardized exams. And in South Korea, where the education system is one of the most brutally competitive in the entire world, where students attend hagwons until midnight and sleep 4 hours a night just to gain a fractional advantage, ranking in the top 1% is not just impressive, it's extraordinary. It means outperforming hundreds of thousands of students who are all studying like their lives depend on it. And Namjoon did it seemingly without breaking a sweat. His teachers noticed this immediately. In the Korean education system, teachers track their top students carefully. These are the kids who will go to Seoul National University, Korea University, Yonsei University. These are the kids who will become doctors, lawyers, engineers, diplomats. These are the kids who carry the school's reputation on their shoulders. And Namjoon was the crown jewel. Teachers would look at his test scores, look at his essays, listen to him articulate complex ideas during class discussions, and think, this kid could do anything. And by anything, they meant the traditional Korean success path, the one that leads to prestige, stability, and societal respect. But there was something else happening behind those perfect test scores, something Namjoon was hiding from his teachers, from his classmates, and for a long time even from his parents. At around 13 or 14 years old, Namjoon heard a track by Epic High, one of Korea's most legendary hip-hop groups, and something inside him fundamentally shifted. The wordplay, the rhythm, the way language could be bent and twisted and weaponized into art, it hit him like a lightning bolt. This wasn't a casual interest. This wasn't a phase. This was an awakening. Namjoon started writing raps. He started studying hip-hop, not just Korean hip-hop, but American hip-hop, underground hip-hop, the history and culture and philosophy behind the art form. And here's something that blows people's minds. Namjoon taught himself English, not through tutors, not through expensive academy programs. He watched the American sitcom Friends over and over and over again, episode by episode, absorbing the language until he could speak it fluently. A teenager in Ilsan, sitting in his bedroom teaching himself an entire language through a 1990s TV show, and doing it so well that years later he would deliver speeches in English to the United Nations General Assembly without a translator. That's not just intelligence, that's an almost terrifying level of self-directed learning ability.
Number 3, Jimin. Number 3. And we need to slow down for a second here, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a talented kid who made it big. This is a story about obsession, about a human being who pushed his body and mind so far past the breaking point that the people who taught him, the people who created the environment where his talent was forged, genuinely feared they were watching a young man consume himself from the inside out. We're talking about Park Jimin, the angel-voiced, silk-moving, impossibly graceful performer whose stage presence is so magnetic that even people who have never listened to a single BTS song stop scrolling when he dances. Jimin is the member that casual viewers point at and say, "Who is that?" He's the one whose fan cams break the internet. He's the one whose movements look like they were choreographed by gravity itself. But that elegance, that effortless, breathtaking beauty you see on stage, was built on a foundation of pain, pressure, and a perfectionism so intense that it almost swallowed him whole. And his teachers? They saw it all. From the very beginning. Let's go back. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Jumjeong District, Busan, the same sprawling port city that gave the world Jungkook. But while Jungkook's school story was about shyness and a leap of faith, Jimin's story is fundamentally different. Because Jimin wasn't a kid who stumbled into the arts by accident. He didn't get scouted on the street like Jin. He didn't discover his passion through a TV show like Namjoon. No, Park Jimin was a trained artist from the ground up, shaped and molded inside one of the most demanding artistic institutions in South Korea. Jimin attended Busan Arts High School, and if you don't know what that means in the Korean context, let me paint you a picture. Busan Arts High School is not a regular high school with an arts elective tacked on. It's a specialized, elite performing arts institution where students audition for admission the same way athletes try out for competitive sports teams. The acceptance rate is brutal. The standards are unforgiving. And once you're in, the workload is relentless. You're balancing full academic coursework with intensive, professional-level training in your chosen artistic discipline every single day. Jimin's discipline? Contemporary modern dance. And he didn't just get in. He was admitted as the top student. Number 1. The best in his entering class. Think about what that means. In a school filled exclusively with the most talented young dancers in Busan. Kids who had been training since childhood. Kids whose parents had invested years of money and time into their development. Park Jimin walked in and was immediately recognized as the one who stood above everyone else. His teachers in the modern dance department saw something in Jimin from day one that went beyond technical skill. Yes, his technique was exceptional. His flexibility was extraordinary. His lines were clean. His musicality was intuitive in a way that can't really be taught. But what set Jimin apart wasn't what he could do. It was how much of himself he poured into everything he did. And this is where the story starts to get complicated. Because Jimin's greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness were the exact same thing. He could not accept anything less than perfection from himself. This wasn't the normal high-achieving student mentality of, I want to do well. This was something deeper, something almost compulsive. If Jimin learned a new dance combination and executed it at 95% accuracy, he wouldn't celebrate the 95%. He would fixate on the 5% he missed. He would practice that combination over and over and over, not 10 times, not 20 times, but hundreds of times, until his body physically couldn't continue. His dance teachers at Busan Arts High School noticed this pattern early on, and their reaction was complicated. On one hand, they were in awe. A student with that level of self-discipline and drive is every teacher's dream. You don't have to motivate Jimin. You don't have to push Jimin. Jimin pushes himself harder than any external force ever could. But on the other hand, and this is the part that kept his teachers up at night, that kind of relentless self-criticism in a teenager is a red flag. Because there's a line between healthy ambition and destructive perfectionism, and Jimin didn't just cross that line. He sprinted past it like it didn't exist. His teachers would find him in the practice studio long after classes ended. They'd see him drenched in sweat, muscles shaking, repeating the same 8-count section for the 100th time with his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with frustration. Not because he was doing it wrong, but because it wasn't perfect enough. They'd tell him to stop. They'd tell him to rest. They'd tell him that what he just did was beautiful, that any professional company would be thrilled with that level of execution. And Jimin would nod politely, wait for them to leave, and then go right back to practicing. That's who he was. That's who he is. And it was during this period at Busan Arts High School that Jimin's path took an unexpected turn. One of his teachers, recognizing that Jimin's talent was too big for the contemporary dance world alone, encouraged him to audition for entertainment companies. This was a significant moment, because in the Korean arts school ecosystem, there's a cultural divide between serious art forms like contemporary dance and the commercial world of K-pop. Some dance purists look down on idol dancing the same way classical musicians sometimes look down on pop music. But Jimin's teachers saw something different. They saw a performer whose emotional expressiveness, physical control, and raw charisma were perfectly suited for the stage. Not just the dance recital stage, but the big stage. The stadium stage. The global stage. So Jimin auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment. And he got in. But here's the twist that people don't often talk about. When Jimin entered Big Hit as a trainee, he was one of the last members to join the BTS lineup. The other members had been training together for months, some for years. They had already formed bonds, established dynamics, and developed their skills within the Big Hit system. And then in walks this contemporary dance prodigy from Busan Arts High School. Technically brilliant, but completely untrained in singing, and with zero experience in hip-hop or street dance, which were the stylistic foundations of BTS's early concept. Suddenly, the top student in his school was the bottom of the class. Jimin could execute a flawless contemporary dance sequence that would make his Busan Arts teachers weep with pride, but when it came to the hard-hitting, aggressive choreography that BTS was building their identity around, he was starting from scratch. And for someone with Jimin's perfectionist mentality, being the weakest link was unbearable. What followed was one of the most intense personal transformations in K-pop trainee history. Jimin didn't just practice harder than everyone else. He practically lived in the practice room. He would train for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours straight. He'd master the group choreography, then stay behind to work on his individual weak points. He'd drill his vocals until his throat was raw. He'd study the other members' styles and try to absorb their strengths into his own performance. And through all of this, he barely ate. This is the part of Jimin's story that's hardest to talk about, but most important to understand. In his desperation to be perfect, to look perfect, to move perfect, to be perfect, Jimin began restricting his food intake to extreme levels. During the trainee period and even into BTS's early debut years, Jimin has openly admitted that there were stretches where he would eat only one meal a day, or sometimes nothing at all, pushing his body to perform at maximum intensity while giving it almost no fuel. His teachers back at Busan Arts High School, if they had known the full extent of what their former top student was putting himself through, would have been devastated, because they had seen the warning signs. They had watched a teenager practice until his body gave out. They had told him to stop and been ignored. They had recognized the dangerous edge of his perfectionism and tried to soften it, tried to teach him that excellence doesn't require self-destruction. But the trainee system amplified everything. The monthly evaluations, the rankings, the threat of elimination, the mirror-covered walls that reflected every perceived flaw back at him in high definition. For someone wired like Jimin, that environment was gasoline on an already raging fire. And yet, through all that pain, through the exhaustion and the hunger and the relentless self-criticism, something extraordinary emerged. Jimin didn't just become a good idol performer. He became something that transcends categories. When Park Jimin dances, you don't see choreography. You see emotion given physical form. Every gesture tells a story. Every facial expression carries weight. The contemporary dance foundation his Busan Arts teachers built inside him. The fluidity, the emotional depth, the attention to the smallest details of movement, fused with the hard-hitting idol training to create a performance style that is uniquely, unmistakably his. No one in K-pop moves like Jimin. No one in K-pop feels like Jimin on stage. That blend of classical training and raw emotional intensity is his signature, and it exists because a young boy in Busan was taught by teachers who demanded excellence, and then he demanded even more from himself. When BTS performs Black Swan, a song literally choreographed around contemporary dance, you can see every hour Jimin spent in that Busan Arts practice room. When he executes a turn so fluid that it looks like slow motion in real time. Number 2. BTS V. Number 2. And right here, right at this moment, we need to completely reset everything you think you know about how K-pop idols are made. Because every story so far on this list, as different as they are, has shared one common thread. Each member, in some way, was prepared for this world. Jin was scouted for his looks. J-Hope was a dance champion. Jungkook had 7 companies chasing him. RM was a genius underground rapper. Jimin was the top student at an art school. They all had something that logically connected them to the entertainment industry, even if the path was unconventional. But the member at number 2? He had nothing. No training. No connections. No industry exposure. No logical reason whatsoever to end up on the biggest stage in music history. He came from a place so far removed from the K-pop machine that the idea of becoming a global superstar wasn't just unlikely. It was incomprehensible. We're talking about Kim Taehyung. V. The man with the face that was literally voted the most handsome in the world by multiple international polls. The man whose deep, velvety baritone voice sounds like it was borrowed from another dimension. The man whose acting, modeling, and solo music career have made him one of the most recognizable human beings on planet Earth. But before all of that, before the Gucci campaigns, before the Cartier ambassadorship, before slow dancing and FRI, Yendi S, and sold-out solo showcases, Kim Taehyung was a boy from a farm. A literal farm. In the countryside. And his teachers remember someone who didn't just stand out. He seemed to exist on an entirely different plane of reality than everyone around him. Let's start at the very beginning, because the beginning is crucial. Kim Taehyung was born on December 30th, 1995, In Daegu, South Korea's fourth largest city, a place known for its conservative values, its sweltering summers, its distinctive dialect, and its apples. But Taehyung didn't grow up in the urban center of Daegu. For a significant portion of his childhood, he was raised in Gyeochang, a rural county in South Gyeongsang province, nestled in the mountains, surrounded by rice paddies, persimmon orchards, and the kind of vast, quiet landscapes where the loudest sound you'll hear on any given afternoon is the wind moving through the fields. Gyeochang is not Seoul. Gyeochang is not even Daegu. Gyeochang is the kind of place where people wake up with the sun, work the earth with their hands, and measure success not in fame or fortune, but in the quality of that season's harvest. Taehyung's father was a farmer. The family was not wealthy. They weren't poor in a dramatic, cinematic way, but they lived modestly, practically, in the way that rural Korean families have lived for generations. And young Taehyung spent much of his early years in this world, running through fields, helping with farm work, living close to the land, being raised partly by his grandmother, who became one of the most important figures in his entire life. Now, imagine being a teacher in this environment and having Kim Taehyung walk into your classroom. By all accounts from people who knew him during his school years, Taehyung was different. Not different in the way that gifted students are different, where you can point to test scores or specific talents and say, "Ah, I see it." Taehyung was different in a way that was harder to define. He was the kid who would stare out the window during class with an expression that made you wonder if he was daydreaming or receiving transmissions from another galaxy. He was the kid who would say something completely unexpected, something funny, or profound, or bizarre, or all three at once, and leave the entire room in confused silence before someone finally started laughing. In Korean culture, there's a term for people like Taehyung, for D. It's slang for someone who seems to operate in 4 dimensions while the rest of us are stuck in 3. A person whose thought patterns, reactions, and behaviors don't follow any predictable logic. Someone who is simultaneously the strangest and the most captivating person in the room. That was Taehyung. His teachers didn't quite know what to do with him. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was too gentle for that. He wasn't a bad student. He was too curious for that. He wasn't antisocial. He was too warm and genuinely kind for that. But he also didn't fit neatly into any of the boxes that the Korean education system is designed around. He wasn't the top academic performer. He wasn't the star athlete. He wasn't the disciplined arts student. He was just Taehyung, a boy who played saxophone, and played it well, with a soulfulness that surprised his music teacher, but never seemed to take it seriously enough to pursue it formally. A boy who had a face so striking that people did double takes when they saw him, but who seemed completely unaware of his own appearance. A boy who was fiercely loyal to his small circle of friends, but could also sit alone for hours, perfectly content in his own company, lost in thoughts that he rarely shared with anyone. And then came the moment that changed everything, and it almost didn't happen. When Taehyung was in middle school, a friend of his was planning to audition for Big Hit Entertainment in Daegu. Just a local audition. Big Hit was a small company at the time, and these regional auditions were designed to cast a wide net and find hidden talent outside of Seoul. Taehyung's friend asked him to come along for moral support. Not to audition, just to be there, just to hang out while his friend tried his luck. Taehyung said sure. He went. He sat in the waiting area, probably looking around with that trademark spacey expression, not thinking about anything in particular. And then, according to the story that has now become legend, a Big Hit staff member saw him, saw his face, saw something in his aura, his energy, his presence. And they asked him, "Are you here to audition?" Taehyung said no. And the staff member said something along the lines of, "You should." So Taehyung, with zero preparation, zero training, zero expectation, and probably zero understanding of what he was getting himself into, walked into that audition room and performed. Some accounts say he sang. Some say he danced a little. The details vary depending on the source. But what doesn't vary is the result. Big Hit wanted him. Immediately. Think about the absurdity of this moment. A farmer's son from Gyeochang who came to an audition as a spectator walked out as a trainee for what would become the biggest boy band in history. His friend, the one who actually came to audition, reportedly did not make it. The universe has a brutal sense of irony sometimes. When Taehyung told his teachers and his family that he'd been accepted as an entertainment trainee, the reactions ranged from confusion to concern to outright disbelief. His teachers in Daegu, The ones who had spent years trying to figure out this strange, beautiful, enigmatic kid, suddenly had to process the idea that he was leaving for Seoul to train as an idol. An idol. The 4D kid from the farm. The saxophone player who stared out windows. The boy who seemed like he belonged in a Studio Ghibli film more than a K-pop training facility. It didn't compute. But Taehyung left. He moved to Seoul. He entered Big Hit. And what happened next was something that even Big Hit themselves didn't fully anticipate. Because when Taehyung arrived, the company made a decision that is almost unheard of in the K-pop industry. They hid him. Taehyung became a hidden member of BTS. While the other trainees, RM, Suga, J-Hope, Jin, Jungkook, Jimin, were being gradually introduced to the public through blog posts, social media, and pre-debut content, Taehyung was kept completely secret. No photos, no videos, no mentions. The public had no idea he existed. There are multiple theories about why Big Hit did this. Some believe it was a strategic move to create buzz and mystery around the debut. Some believe the company wanted to protect Taehyung, who was even more introverted and overwhelmed by Seoul than Jungkook had been. Whatever the reason, the result was that when BTS finally debuted on June 13, 2013, and Kim Taehyung appeared on screen for the first time, the reaction was explosive. People lost their minds. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Why has nobody ever seen him before? He was the mystery member, the hidden card, the ace that Big Hit had kept in their back pocket. And Taehyung himself, the farmer's son, the 4D kid, the boy who accidentally auditioned, suddenly had cameras in his face and thousands of people screaming his name. The transition would have shattered most people. But here's what Taehyung's teachers, looking back, would probably recognize as the key to his survival. That same otherworldly quality that made him seem disconnected from reality in school. It was actually a superpower. Taehyung processed the chaos of fame the same way he processed everything else, through his own internal filter, at his own pace, on his own terms. While other idols crumbled under the pressure of public scrutiny, Taehyung remained authentically, stubbornly, beautifully himself. The same quirky humor, the same unexpected depth, the same gentle warmth that made his Jeochang grandmother's love visible in everything he did. He didn't become someone else when he got famous. He just became a more visible version of who he always was. And his artistry. Oh, his artistry. That deep baritone voice that no one in K-pop expected. The acting talent that earned him a role in the Korean drama, Warang. The solo music that drips with vintage soul and jazz influences that feel a million miles away from typical K-pop. The photography, the painting, the fashion sensibility that made him a muse for luxury brands. All of it traces back to that same quality his teachers couldn't quite name. That 4D energy, that refusal to conform, that ability. Number 1. Suga. Number 1. We're here. The summit. The story that every other story on this list has been building toward. And before we dive in, let's be honest with each other. You probably guessed the name. If you know anything about BTS, if you've ever read about their history, if you've ever listened to the raw, bleeding, unflinching lyrics that pour out of this man's music like an open wound that refuses to heal, then you already know we're talking about Min Yoongi. Suga. August D. The pale, soft-spoken, cat-eyed producer from Taegu who speaks quietly, moves slowly, and looks like he'd rather be napping than doing anything else, until he steps behind a microphone or sits in front of a production board. And then suddenly you realize that this man carries more fire inside him than a volcano that's been holding its breath for 1,000 years. Suga is not the loudest member of BTS. He's not the flashiest performer. He's not the one who grabs your attention first. But ask any army, any real army, who the creative backbone of BTS is, and the answer comes back the same every single time. Yoongi. He is the architect, the producer, the lyricist who turned his darkest moments into songs that saved millions of lives. And his origin story, the real origin story, not the polished version, is the most devastating, most inspiring, and most important story in this entire list. Because Min Yoongi didn't just overcome obstacles. He survived things that should have destroyed him. And his teachers? They watched it happen in real time. They saw a boy sinking, and they couldn't reach him. Let's go back. Min Yoongi was born on March 9, 1993, in Taegu, the same city that produced Taehyung, but a world apart in terms of experience. While Taehyung's childhood was rural and gentle, Jung's was urban and harsh. His family lived in poverty. Not the kind of "we couldn't afford the newest things" mild inconvenience that some people label as hardship, real poverty. The kind where basic necessities were a daily calculation. The kind where his parents worked exhausting jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. And even then, sometimes the math didn't add up. Jung has spoken about this in interviews and in his music with a rawness that still shocks people. He's described a childhood where his family had to choose, literally choose, between paying for his education and eating properly. Let that sink in. A child growing up in one of the world's most technologically advanced, economically powerful nations, and his family was making daily trade-offs between food and school. In that environment, his teachers would have seen a kid who was different from his classmates in ways that were hard to articulate. Jung wasn't the disruptive student. He wasn't the class clown. He wasn't the overachiever trying to study his way out of poverty. He was the kid who sat in class with a wall around him, present but unreachable, physically in the room but mentally somewhere else entirely. He was quiet in a way that made teachers uneasy. Not Jungkook's shy quiet or Taehyung's dreamy quiet. Jung's silence had an edge to it. It was the silence of a kid who was carrying too much weight for his age and had decided, consciously or unconsciously, that letting people in was more dangerous than keeping them out. Because behind that silence, something was brewing. At a young age, some accounts say as early as 11 or 12, Jung discovered rap music. And when I say discovered, I don't mean he casually listened to a few songs and thought it was cool. I mean he found the thing that gave his life meaning. In a world that felt suffocating, the poverty, the pressure, the feeling that the future was a locked door with no key, rap music was the first thing that made Jung feel like he could breathe. He started writing lyrics almost immediately. And from the very beginning, his writing was different. While other teenage aspiring rappers were writing about things they'd seen in music videos, money, fame, bravado, Jung was writing about what he actually lived. The frustration, the anger, the fear, the suffocating weight of knowing that your family can't afford the life that everyone around you takes for granted. His words were raw, unfiltered, and so honest that they made people uncomfortable. By the time he was in his early teens, Jung had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He wanted to be a musician, not as a hobby, not as a backup plan, as his life. But here's where the story gets dark, because almost every single person in his world told him he was insane. His parents? They were against it, and not in a casual, "we'd prefer you study" kind of way. They were firmly, desperately against it. And honestly, from their perspective, how could they not be? They were struggling to put food on the table. They had sacrificed everything to give their son a chance at a stable future. And now their son was telling them he wanted to pursue rap music in Daegu, a conservative city with no entertainment industry infrastructure, in a country where the odds of making it in music are astronomically low, from a family with zero connections and zero financial safety net. To his parents, Jung's dream wasn't just impractical. It was an existential threat to the family. If he chased music instead of getting a stable job, who would help support them? Who would carry the family forward? The tension between Jung's dream and his family's reality created a rift that lasted for years. Years. And Jung, stubborn, determined, burning with a quiet rage that he channeled directly into his lyrics, refused to give up. He started working part-time jobs to fund his music on his own. He delivered newspapers. He took whatever gigs he could find. He scraped together every one he could save, skipping meals to do it. And eventually he bought his first piece of real equipment, a MIDI keyboard. Let that image sit with you for a second. A teenager in Daegu, hungry because he chose not to eat so he could save money, sitting in a tiny room with a cheap keyboard, teaching himself music production note by note, beat by beat, while the world around him told him he was wasting his time. That MIDI keyboard was more than a piece of equipment. It was a declaration of war against every limitation life had placed on him. Jung began producing music. He joined Daegu's underground rap scene under the name Gloss. And just like Namjoon in Seoul's underground circuit, Jung in Daegu was building a reputation. He wasn't just rapping. He was producing entire tracks, writing entire songs, creating a body of work that was so advanced for his age that people in the local scene started taking serious notice. His teachers at school? They had no idea any of this was happening. To them, Jung was still the quiet kid with the wall around him. The kid whose grades were mediocre because he didn't care about academics. The kid who showed up, sat through class, and disappeared the moment the bell rang. If they had known that this apparently disengaged student was going home to produce music at a level that would eventually influence an entire global genre, they would have been stunned. But Jung's double life, model student by day, underground producer by night. Actually, scratch that. He wasn't even a model student by day. He was barely a student at all. His mind was entirely consumed by music, and school was just the thing he had to endure between sessions. And then came the car accident. This is the part of Jung's story that physically hurts to tell. While working a part-time delivery job, riding a bicycle or scooter through Daegu's streets to earn money for his music, Jung was hit by a car. The accident was serious. He sustained a significant injury to his shoulder, the kind of injury that causes chronic pain, limits mobility, and for a musician who needs his arms and hands to produce and perform, could have been career-ending before his career even started. But here's what Jung did, and this is the part that reveals the almost frightening depth of his determination. He hid the injury. When he eventually joined Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee, he didn't tell them about his shoulder. He was terrified, absolutely terrified, that if the company found out he was damaged goods, they would drop him. So he trained through the pain. He danced through the pain. He performed through the pain. Every rehearsal, every evaluation, every practice session, he was fighting through a level of physical discomfort that his fellow trainees couldn't see because he had perfected the art of hiding his suffering. His teachers back in Daegu, the ones who had watched a withdrawn, struggling kid sit in their classrooms, had no idea that their former student was now in Seoul, physically broken, emotionally battered, and holding onto his dream with a grip so tight that his knuckles were white and his shoulder was screaming. And then came the darkest chapter. During the trainee period and into BTS's early years, Jung's mental health deteriorated to a point that he has since described in his music with devastating honesty. He was battling depression. He was battling anxiety. He was battling the accumulated weight of years of poverty, family conflict, physical pain, and the relentless pressure of the trainee system. In his mixtapes as August D, particularly in songs like The Last and People, Jung has described reaching moments where he questioned whether he wanted to continue living. He's talked about visiting a psychiatrist. He's talked about being diagnosed with depression and social anxiety disorder. He's talked about the stigma of mental health in Korean society and how it made him feel even more isolated. Let me say this as clearly as possible. Min Jung, at his lowest point, was a young man who had given everything: his health, his family relationships, his financial security, his emotional well-being, for a dream that still hadn't materialized. BTS debuted in 2013, but they weren't successful overnight. Their early years were a struggle. Small stages.
And there it is, all 7. From number 7 to number 1. 7 boys, 7 classrooms, 7 teachers who had absolutely no idea that the kids sitting in their chairs would one day stand on stages that shook the entire planet. Think about it. A quiet film student who had never held a microphone became the worldwide handsome pillar of the biggest group in history. A street dance champion from Gwangju traded underground battles for sold-out arenas and never lost a single ounce of his fire. A shy 15-year-old from Busan who couldn't make eye contact with his teachers became the most streamed Korean solo artist the world has ever seen. A genius with an IQ of 148 walked away from every safe door that was open to him and kicked down the one door everyone told him was locked forever. A perfectionist from an elite art school nearly broke himself in half chasing flawlessness, and in doing so created a performance style that no one on earth can replicate. A farmer's son who accidentally walked into an audition became one of the most beautiful and captivating human beings the world has ever watched. And a poor kid from Daegu who bought his first keyboard with money he saved by not eating turned his pain into music that saved millions of lives. 7 stories, 7 completely different starting points, but one shared truth. The people who change the world are almost never the ones the world expects. They're the quiet ones,
The weird ones, the broke ones, the ones who sit in the back of the class and stare out the window, the ones whose teachers worry about, the ones whose parents argue with, the ones who don't fit the mold, don't check the boxes, and don't make sense on paper. BTS didn't make sense on paper. A tiny company, 7 unknown boys, no connections, no privilege, no industry backing. Every odd was stacked against them so high that you'd need a telescope to see the top. And they didn't just beat those odds, they shattered them into dust and rewrote the entire rule book for what's possible. So the next time you look at a kid in a classroom, maybe a kid who's too quiet, too strange, too stubborn, too different, remember this list. Remember that Kim Seok-jin was scouted on a sidewalk. Remember that Jungkook danced in basements before he danced at Wembley. Remember that Jungkook chose his entire future because of a gut feeling at 15. Remember that Kim Namjoon's teacher begged his mother to stop him. Remember that Park Ji-min practiced until his body gave out and still got back up. Remember that Kim Taehyung walked into an audition he never planned to take. And remember that Min Yoongi was hungry, broken, and alone in a tiny room with a cheap keyboard, and he still didn't quit. Their teachers planted seeds they didn't know they were planting, and those seeds grew into something that no classroom, no textbook, and no curriculum could have ever predicted. That's BTS. That's the story their teachers told. And now, it's your story too. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's a kid sitting in a classroom dreaming a dream that nobody around them understands. Maybe that kid is you. Maybe that kid is someone you know. And maybe, just maybe, the world isn't ready for what that kid is about to become. Thank you for watching. If this hit you the way it hit us, like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which member's story moved you the most. We'll see you in the next one. Stay curious, stay inspired, and never, never let anyone tell you that your dream is too big for someone like you. Peace.